She ignored her millionaire father's threats and got married. What happened at the altar left everyone in shock. An heiress scarred inside and out, despised by her own millionaire father, defies everything to marry the man she loves. But during the ceremony, her father crashes the reception, revealing something that completely changes the course of their lives. Amid twists, threats, and betrayals, she fights to uncover the truth, heal her wounds, and reclaim her destiny. A gripping tale of courage, love, and redemption that will hold you captive until the very last moment. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated and never miss these stories. In the heart of New York City, among skyscrapers that pierced the heavens, stood a mansion so imposing it seemed to defy time itself. Within its grand walls lived Richard Hawthorne, a financial magnate renowned for his immense wealth and disdain for anything he deemed imperfect. He ruled his life the same way he managed his empire, with cold precision, calculated moves, and an insatiable hunger for power. His only daughter, Marianne, served as a constant reminder of the one thing he couldn't control: imperfection. Marianne Hawthorne, at 28, was a woman with a radiant personality but haunted by scars she bore since childhood. At just 8 years old, a fire had consumed part of the east wing of the Hawthorne mansion, leaving her with permanent marks on her face and body. From that day on, her father saw her as a burden, a blemish on the flawless image of the Hawthorne dynasty. A disgrace, he'd mutter, just loud enough for her to hear. Yet Marianne grew resilient. Though she was never embraced by the elite circles her father moved in, she found solace in books, music, and eventually art. She spent countless hours in tucked-away galleries in Brooklyn, far from the critical eyes of the Upper East Side. It was in these sanctuaries of creativity that her spirit found relief, and her heart stumbled upon the unexpected. One rainy afternoon, Marianne stood in the small Birchwood Gallery, examining an abstract painting that erupted in shades of blue and red. Beside her, a man stared at the same piece with quiet intensity. His smile was faint, his face a striking contrast to the harsh world around her. When he finally spoke, his voice was like a gentle breeze. Funny how chaos can be so beautiful. Caught off guard, Marianne replied without hesitation, "Only when you choose to see beyond the destruction." The man introduced himself as Elijah Carter, a self-taught painter whose work was featured in the gallery. His attire was simple, his demeanor unassuming, but there was something about him, a mysterious aura and a magnetic warmth that made Marianne feel truly seen for the first time. In the days that followed, their paths intertwined. They walked through the streets of Brooklyn, discovered hidden cafes, and shared conversations that flowed like the rhythm of the city. Elijah was unlike anyone Marianne had ever known. He saw her for who she was, unburdened by judgment. He praised her ideas, laughed at her jokes, and most importantly, seemed oblivious to the scars that defined her outward appearance. For Marianne, Elijah was a refuge. For Elijah, she was an enigma he couldn't resist unraveling. Richard Hawthorne soon noticed the change in his daughter. Once a quiet, withdrawn figure in the grand mansion, Marianne now radiated a newfound light. She left more often, and her eyes held a spark he hadn't seen before. Using his considerable resources, Richard dug into Elijah's background and discovered his lack of status and wealth. To Richard, Elijah was nothing more than an opportunist. When Marianne announced her engagement to Elijah, Richard exploded. He confronted her in the mansion's grand hall, a space suffocating with ornate tapestries and sculptures that seemed to amplify the tension. Have you lost your mind? Marrying a nobody? He only wants your inheritance. He'll ruin you, just like he's ruined everything I've built. Richard's voice echoed off the marble walls. But Marianne didn't waver. For the first time in her life, she stood her ground. It's not my inheritance he wants, Father. It's something you've never given me, love. And I won't give it up, even if it means losing everything you control. Her words struck Richard like a slap. Furious, he disowned her on the spot, but Marianne didn't flinch. Days later, a simple ceremony took place in a small church in Brooklyn, far from the glamour and grandeur of the Hawthorne name. Surrounded by a few close friends and allies, Marianne and Elijah exchanged vows under the flicker of candlelight. As she smiled beside the man she chose to love, an ominous shadow loomed over their future. A shadow that was about to burst through the church doors with devastating force. The reception after the ceremony was modest but brimming with emotion. The small hall next to the church was adorned with wildflowers, lovingly arranged by Elijah's friends. Marianne, in a simple yet elegant white dress, glowed with a radiance as if she had finally found her own light. Elijah, in his modest suit, watched his wife with a mix of admiration and something more, an unease he tried to hide. Guests toasted with glasses of inexpensive sparkling wine, and laughter echoed through the room. Marianne felt a rare happiness, a sense of freedom. After years of suffocating under her father's relentless demands, she now had something he could never control. Her independence and a love that felt real. As the celebration continued, Elijah moved through the hall, his attention repeatedly drawn to the door. His normally calm eyes betrayed a growing tension. Marianne noticed but dismissed it as nerves from such an important day. Elijah, she called softly, touching his arm. Is everything all right? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, just a lot to take in. Outside, the first signs of a storm began to brew. The once blue sky had turned a menacing gray, and the wind lashed at the trees with increasing force. Oblivious to what was about to unfold, Marianne mingled with guests, expressing gratitude for their presence, while Elijah stole another glance at the door. Then it happened. The screech of tires outside drew everyone's attention. A sleek black limousine skidded to a stop at the entrance, followed closely by two dark sedans. Marianne's heart sank as she recognized the license plate of the limousine. It belonged to her father. The hall's doors burst open with a thunderous crash, and Richard Hawthorne stormed in, flanked by four men in black suits. Whispered murmurs rippled through the crowd as Marianne froze at the sight of her father. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he carried an air of triumph laced with disdain. So, this is where my daughter chose to bury her name? Richard's cutting voice filled the room. He cast a disdainful glance around the humble hall and its modest attendees. How fitting. Looks more like a funeral than a wedding. Marianne, regaining her composure, stepped forward. You weren't invited, Father. Leave. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was firm. Ignoring her, Richard turned his gaze to Elijah. You must be the illustrious Elijah Carter, painter, artist, and, most importantly, liar. He tossed an envelope onto a nearby table, the papers spilling out and fluttering to the floor. These documents reveal who you truly are. The room fell silent as Marianne looked at Elijah. He remained still, silent. His hesitation was enough for Richard to continue. Elijah Carter isn't just a painter. He's a con artist, wanted in 2 states for swindling wealthy women and disappearing with their fortunes. Marian felt the ground crumble beneath her feet. She turned to Elijah, searching for denial and explanation. Anything. But he stood motionless, shame and guilt etched across his face. Is it true? Marianne's voice broke through the silence, filled with disbelief and pain. Elijah, tell me he's lying. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice weak. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Marianne. When I met you, everything changed. I fell in love with you, truly. Marianne recoiled as if struck. Richard, sensing victory, delivered his final blow. You should be thanking me, daughter. I saved you from a miserable fate. But to his surprise, Marianne neither cried nor crumbled. She lifted her gaze, meeting her father's with a strength he hadn't anticipated. Saved? You've never saved me from anything, Father. The only thing you've ever done is imprison me in a life I never wanted. You think this is love? I want no part of it. The room remained silent, the tension palpable. All eyes were on Richard, anticipating his next move. What followed, however, was completely unexpected. One of the men in black suits stepped forward, revealing a gleaming badge. Mr. Hawthorne, you are under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud. The air seemed to vanish from the hall as guests watched the shocking scene unfold before them. Richard Hawthorne, the once untouchable magnate, was now being handcuffed by FBI agents right there at his own daughter's wedding. His arrogance melted into a mix of fury and disbelief. He glared at the agent's badge, shouting, "You don't know who you're dealing with. This is a grotesque mistake." Marianne, still in shock, stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. As Richard was escorted out, murmurs swelled among the guests. But soon, all eyes turned to Elijah, who stood rooted in place, his face a storm of shame and despair. You knew about this, Elijah? Marianne's voice sliced through the tension like a blade. She didn't scream, but the pain in her tone was sharper than any outburst. Elijah hesitated, but he knew there was no more running. Marianne, he stepped forward, but she raised her hand, signaling him to stop. Tell me the truth. Now. Elijah took a deep breath. The room seemed to shrink as everyone waited for his response. I knew your father was involved in illegal activities. In fact, I was sent to investigate him. He met her eyes, pleading for understanding. I'm an undercover FBI agent. The revelation hit like thunder. Marian blinked, struggling to grasp what she'd just heard. You've been lying to me since the beginning, she asked, her voice trembling. Elijah shook his head. At first, yes. My mission was to get close to you to get to your father. But I didn't expect to fall in love with you. For real. The weight of his words crushed her. It all felt like a cruel game, yet the look in Elijah's eyes seemed genuine. He truly appeared regretful. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt anchored to the ground. And now, what would you do in Marianne's place? Would you trust someone who lied to you, even if they claimed their love was real? Let us know in the comments. As Richard Hawthorne was taken away, the tension in the hall remained thick. Marianne, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, turned to the guests and said firmly, "The party's over. Thank you for coming." The guests began to leave, though a small group of friends stayed behind to offer their support. Marian thanked them, but the weight on her chest felt unbearable. Elijah tried to approach her again, but she stopped him with a raised hand. I need time to think. to figure out what's real and what was a lie. He nodded, respecting her decision. "I love you, Marianne, and I'll prove it, one way or another." He left the hall, knowing he had a long road ahead to earn back her trust. As Marianne walked to the now empty altar, one of her friends followed her. "You're going to be okay, Mari. You're stronger than you think." She gave a faint smile, but her heart remained torn between the pain and the faint hope that Elijah might truly be different. If this story has you hooked and eager to find out what happens next, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't miss the upcoming twists and turns in this gripping saga. That night, Marianne returned to the small apartment she shared with Elijah. It was a simple place, far from the luxury of the Hawthorne mansion, but it had become her home over the past few months. Now, however, every corner seemed to bear the weight of the lies that had been uncovered. She sat on the couch, staring into nothingness, as the tears she had held back in front of others finally began to fall. In the silence of the apartment, the sound of rain tapping against the window only amplified the storm in her mind. How could Elijah have deceived her so cruelly? Yet, there was something in his words that felt genuine. And that declaration of love, could she trust a feeling born from a lie? While Marianne struggled to piece together her thoughts, Elijah was a few blocks away, sitting on a park bench. He couldn't bring himself to return home. He knew he didn't deserve to be near her now. His hands trembled as he wrestled with what to do. His entire FBI career had been built on secrets, but for the first time, the cost seemed too great. Back at the apartment, Marianne recalled something Elijah had said the night he proposed. "Love is the only truth that matters." It felt ironic now, given the circumstances, but as she thought about it, something inside her began to shift. The next morning, Marianne made a decision. She put on a coat, grabbed the envelope Richard had left behind, and went to see a trusted attorney. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but she needed to uncover the full truth about her father, about Elijah, and about herself. The attorney, a graying man named William Cartwright, greeted her with a grave expression. "Marianne, I've been waiting for you to come to me. For years, I've tried to warn you about your father's dealings, but you never seemed ready to listen." "I'm listening now," Marianne said firmly. "Tell me everything." William explained that Richard Hawthorne had built his empire on a foundation of fraudulent schemes, including market manipulation, money laundering, and illegal deals with influential politicians. The FBI has been investigating him for over a decade. Elijah was probably the final piece of the puzzle. As she listened, Marianne felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at having lived so long under the control of such a corrupt man. Relief at finally being free from that shadowed past. But what did this mean for Elijah? And now, what do you think Marianne should do? Trust Elijah's love or walk away forever and start fresh? Share your thoughts in the comments. Back at the apartment, Marianne found a note from Elijah on the table. The words were simple yet heavy with emotion. "Marianne, I can't undo what I've done, but I can fight to earn back your trust. I'll step away, but I'll be here waiting. If you decide there's still a place for me in your life." Marianne held the note in her trembling hands. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt that she was in control of her own story. In the days that followed, Marianne found herself swept into a whirlwind of emotions and reflections. The revelations about her father and Elijah had left her adrift, but they also brought an unexpected clarity. She was no longer the invisible woman who had lived in the shadows of the Hawthorne name. She was now the architect of her own destiny, To escape the chaos, she decided to visit the gallery where it had all begun. The space was empty, bathed in the soft light of late afternoon streaming through the windows. Marian wandered through the corridors, each painting seeming to echo a memory of her encounters with Elijah. She stopped in front of one of his works, an abstract portrait in shades of blue and gold that had always intrigued her. It felt as though the canvas was whispering something she still didn't understand. As she stood there, Greta, the gallery owner, appeared silently by her side. "He always talked about you, Greta said. He said you were the first person who saw something beyond the colors in his paintings." Marian turned to her, surprised, but said nothing. Greta continued, "Whatever happened between you two, Elijah never faked what he felt. That's rare, even in the midst of so much chaos." Those words lingered in Marianne's mind as she returned home. Could Greta be right? Despite all the lies and secrets, was Elijah's love genuine? Or was it just another manipulation in a carefully orchestrated scheme? That night, she dreamed of the fire that had changed her life forever. The suffocating heat, the flames, and the overwhelming sense of abandonment as no one seemed to hear her cries. She woke up gasping, but something about the dream brought a new realization. All her life, she had waited for someone to rescue her. Now it was time to rescue herself. The next morning, Marianne made another bold decision. She returned to William Cartwright's office, this time with a proposal. "I want the full truth about my father to come out," she said. "I want to repair the damage he caused, even if it means losing everything." William nodded, surprised by her determination. "This will be hard, Marianne. There will be resistance, threats. But if you're willing, we can start immediately." And so they did. Marianne spent weeks poring over documents, working with lawyers, and even confronting her father's former allies who tried to dissuade her. With every step, she felt stronger, freer. Meanwhile, Elijah kept his distance. He knew he needed to give Marianne space, but he was also determined to prove his worth. Working quietly behind the scenes, he used his FBI connections to ensure no harm would come to her. Though they hadn't spoken, he watched over her from afar, a silent shadow ready to protect her. What do you think? Is Marianne right to try to rebuild her family's legacy? Or should she leave it all behind and start fresh? Share your thoughts and spread this story to anyone who loves a gripping tale. When the first article was published exposing Richard Hawthorne's crimes, the impact was seismic. Headlines hailed Marianne as the heiress who dismantled her father's corrupt empire. While there were critics, many saw her as a hero, someone willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. But with the exposure came new threats. Anonymous letters began arriving, and eerie phone calls woke her in the middle of the night. Still, Marianne refused to back down. "If my father taught me anything, it's how to face fear," she told William. Yet, amidst it all, one question lingered. What about Elijah? Would he be willing to stand by her side after everything they'd been through? The following days were a trial by fire for Marianne. The threats she received grew bolder with each passing day. One evening, she found a note taped to her apartment door. "You don't know who you're messing with. Stop or you'll face the consequences." Though fear gripped her, she refused to give in. "If my father built this empire on lies, I'll destroy it with the truth," she resolved. Meanwhile, Elijah stayed in the shadows, following Marianne's fight from a distance. His heart ached as he watched her face everything alone, but he respected the space she had demanded. However, when he learned about the threats, he could no longer remain idle. He had to protect her, even if she wasn't ready to accept him back into her life. One evening, as Marian sifted through documents in her apartment, she heard a strange noise at the window. Her heart raced. Remembering the threats, she grabbed the heaviest object she could find and approached the window cautiously. Pulling back the curtain, she saw Elijah standing on the sidewalk, looking up at her. "Marianne," he called out, his voice laced with concern. "I need to talk to you. Please just hear me out." She hesitated but eventually opened the building's door. When he stepped inside, Elijah looked anxious. "I know you don't want to see me, but I have to tell you something. The threats you've been receiving, I've investigated them. It's not just your father's former allies. There's a much bigger organization behind this." Marianne's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Bigger how?" Elijah explained, "The money laundering operation your father led was part of an international network. Now that you're exposing everything, the people at the top of this network are furious. They'll do anything to stop you." A chill ran down Marianne's spine. The battle she thought she was fighting against her father's legacy was far more vast and dangerous than she had imagined. "So what do I do now? Stay quiet? Pretend none of this happened?" Her voice cracked with desperation. "No," Elijah replied firmly. "You keep going, but not alone. Let me help you. I know how these people think, how they operate. If we work together, we can bring them all down. And I promise, I won't let you down again." Marian took a deep breath, looking into Elijah's eyes. The hurt was still there, but so was the sincerity. After a long pause, she finally said, "If you want to help me, you'll have to follow my rules. No more secrets." Elijah nodded. "No more secrets. You have my word." Over the next few weeks, the two worked together. Marian continued facing lawyers and the relentless media, while Elijah dove deeper into the criminal network's inner workings. Through sleepless nights and tense strategy meetings, they began to rebuild trust. Marian still kept her guard up, but little by little the ice began to thaw. One night, while combing through a stack of documents in the apartment, Elijah froze. "Marian," he said, his voice tight, "you need to see this." She leaned over, reading the paper in his hands. It was a contract signed by her father, and her name was on it too. "They used you as a front for illegal transfers," Elijah explained. "Without knowing, you were directly tied to the operation." Marian felt a wave of panic crash over her. "Does this mean I'm guilty too?" Elijah took her hands gently. "No, it means we have more ammunition to expose these people. But we have to move fast. They won't stop until they silence you." In the days that followed, Marianne and Elijah focused all their energy on gathering evidence and seeking allies. The mounting threat from the criminal network forced them to adopt extreme security measures. Elijah installed cameras in her apartment and enlisted fellow FBI agents to discreetly monitor her safety. Despite these precautions, the tension was palpable. The situation reached a boiling point one evening when Marian returned from William Cartwright's office to find her apartment door slightly ajar. Elijah was already inside, gun drawn, inspecting every corner. "There's no one here," he said as Marian hesitantly stepped in. But the message was clear. Someone had broken in to intimidate her. "They're getting bolder," Elijah muttered, his eyes dark. "That means we're too close to the truth." Marianne, still shaken, replied, "And that's exactly why I won't stop." Despite the danger, Marianne decided to take care of herself. She was tired of carrying not only her emotional trauma but also the physical scars that had so often shaped how the world perceived her. She sought out a renowned plastic surgeon specializing in burn reconstruction. "I want to be free of this," she said, gently touching the scars on her face. The doctor looked at her with respect. "You're already beautiful, Miss Hawthorne, but if this will help reflect who you are inside, we'll do our best." After weeks of procedures and recovery, Marian finally saw her new reflection in the mirror. Her face, now free from the marks of the fire, seemed to mirror the rebirth of her spirit. She smiled, feeling, for the first time, as strong and confident on the outside as she had always been on the inside. On the decisive night, Marianne and Elijah executed their plan. Elijah had tracked the source of the documents implicating Marianne and discovered that one of the top leaders of the criminal network would be attending a secret meeting at a luxury hotel in Manhattan. "This is our chance," he said. "If we can record this meeting, it's over for them." Marianne dressed in an elegant black gown that highlighted her newfound confidence. Her face, lightly adorned with makeup, radiated both beauty and the strength of someone who had overcome the impossible. In the ballroom, she blended seamlessly with the other guests while Elijah, disguised as a waiter, planted microphones and cameras. During the meeting, the leaders discussed her. "Marianne is a threat," one of the men said. "She has the media and the public on her side. We need to act before she ruins everything." Listening from a secure location, Elijah sent a single message to the FBI. Now, within minutes, agents stormed the venue, arresting everyone present. Chaos erupted in the ballroom, but Marian managed to slip away unnoticed. In the days that followed, news of the operation dominated the headlines. The criminal network was dismantled, and Marianne, though still grappling with emotional scars, emerged as a symbol of courage and determination. Her renewed face became a beacon of hope and resilience for countless women inspired by her journey. And Elijah, he kept his promise to support Marianne without overstepping. But on a sunny afternoon in Brooklyn, he found her again at the Birchwood Gallery. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, handing her a small painting. It was the abstract portrait Elijah had painted shortly after meeting her. But now, the shades of blue and gold had been transformed into something brighter, more vibrant. "This is how I see you now. Someone who faced chaos and became even more beautiful." Marian smiled, carefully holding the painting. "Thank you for everything. Maybe we can start over." "No secrets this time," Elijah smiled back. "I'd love that." As they walked together through the streets of Brooklyn, Marian felt truly free for the first time. Free to love, to live, and to create a future unburdened by the shadows of her past. Did you love the ending? Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your feedback means the world to us, and we're so grateful to have you along for this emotional journey.